It was a dark and stormy night, and the power had gone out in the small town of Millfield. Sarah, a young college student, was driving through the town on her way home from a late-night study session. As she passed through the deserted streets, she noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, Sarah assumed it was just a person caught in the storm, but as she got closer, she realized something was off. The figure was too tall and too thin, and its eyes glowed in the darkness. Suddenly, it lunged towards her car, causing her to swerve off the road and crash into a ditch. Shaken but not injured, Sarah stumbled out of her car and looked around for the figure, but it was nowhere to be seen. She tried to call for help, but her phone was dead. With no other options, she began to walk towards the nearest house, hoping to find someone who could help her. As she approached the house, she noticed that the windows were boarded up, and the front door hung off its hinges. Despite her better judgment, Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was dark and musty, and Sarah could feel her heart racing as she walked through the empty halls. Suddenly, she heard a strange noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone was dragging their feet along the floor. With a sense of dread, Sarah began to climb the stairs. The noise grew louder with each step, until she reached the top of the landing. There, in front of her, was the figure from the road. It was taller than she had thought, with long, spindly limbs and glowing eyes. It let out a low growl and began to move towards her. Sarah tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen in fear as the creature reached out to grab her. Just as it was about to make contact, the power flickered back on, and the creature vanished into thin air. Sarah collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. In the days that followed, Sarah tried to convince herself that it had all been a hallucination brought on by the crash, but every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the creature's breath on her face and hear its low growl echoing in her ears. She knew that it was only a matter of time before it came back for her. Despite her best efforts to move on from the terrifying experience, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. She tried to focus on her studies and spending time with friends, but the memory of the creature haunted her every waking moment. One night, Sarah was studying late in the library when she received a text message from an unknown number. The message simply said, "I'm coming for you." Sarah's heart raced as she tried to figure out who had sent the message. Had the creature somehow found her? She tried to call her friends for help, but no one answered. With no other options, Sarah decided to make a run for it. She gathered her things and hurried out of the library, hoping to make it to her car before the creature caught up with her. But as she stepped outside, she saw the creature standing in front of her. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and Sarah could feel its hot breath on her face. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The creature lunged at her, and Sarah closed her eyes, bracing herself for the worst. But then, she heard a gunshot. When she opened her eyes, she saw that her friend, who was a police officer, had arrived just in time and had shot the creature.